Hey guys, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to Total War Warhammer 2. Today is the second part of my sponsored series of army roster guides and we're going to be looking at the High Elves. During my escapades in the campaign with the High Elves, I found them to be a very strong defensive army with a lovely mix of well-armored speared units, some of the best archers with formidable range that can just force your opponents to have to attack you, and when you combine that with the Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower, which can change modes to be effective against those with heavy armor and also those with no armor with a multi-bolt capacity, crazy powerful cavalry like these elite dragon princes, and a wide variety of aerial units and multiple dragons has made the High Elves one of the most interesting races for me to play in the game. So stick around and by the end of this video you'll know everything there is to know about the High Elves. Let's get started. So firstly, let's take a look at the two lords that you will play in the High Elf campaign, starting with Tyrion. Tyrion is the greatest living High Elven warrior. Armed with Sunfang, there are very few who can match Tyrion in combat. He's also rather simple with regards to the abilities that you can use. For example, Feint and Riposte just boosts his defense, his physical resistance, and his melee attack to give him that little bit of bonus inside the combat. Tyrion can also use Sunfang to do damage in a cone in front of him, and yeah, that's a quick way to get some roasted rat on the battlefield. Apart from that, he's pretty straightforward, but as he's a duelist, that makes him excellent for trying to focus the enemy lords. Next up, Teclis, the twin brother of Tyrion. But unlike Tyrion, Teclis is frail, whose life is only sustained by the potions and elixirs that he takes. However, Teclis is a master spellcaster who is capable of giving even some of the Slan priests a run for their money. Offensively, Teclis can use his Chain Lightning ability to do damage to the opponents in an AoE effect. When you combine the enemies all blobbing up like this with your defensive line, just throw that Chain Lightning over the top and hope that your Chain Lightning doesn't come back to get your troops, and it can be very effective indeed. Teclis also has the Flaming Sword of Ruin, which provides a buff inside an AoE circle. This gives all troops magical damage plus 25% weapon damage to be exact, and also plus 25% missile damage if you want to use it on ranged units. Teclis can also enfeeble his foes, making them weaker at attacking and also defending for 24 seconds, as well as summoning a Flock of Doom over the mainstay of the enemy forces. But my favorite ability of his has to be Regrowth. If you see that one of your units is taking a substantial amount of damage, just throw Regrowth on them. Not only are they going to get plus 22% physical resistance, but they're also going to recover their hit points, as we can see here. Or if a Phoenix is more your thing, why not use it to cause a scorching pile of barbecued rat? Now let's take a look at the series of melee units that make up the High Elven army. Firstly, Spearmen. Acknowledged. And while they are the most basic of High Elven unit, they are both shielded and with spears, and so this makes them very proficient at defending against ranged as well as large units, and they can even brace themselves to negate a charging enemy. Spearmen will be the backbone of any starting Elven campaign, and for such a basic unit that you can get initially, they are rather strong indeed. However, when it comes to the offense, look no further than the White Lions, armed with great axes and cloaks where you can easily see where they get their name from. White Lions are vastly more heavily armored than your Spearmen. Their leadership is higher, their melee attack is nearly double, but unfortunately their melee defense is substantially lower. However, while your Spearmen are almost entirely defensive units, look at the charge bonus that White Lions get, making them rather good on the offensive. White Lions are also armor piercing, which makes them a great choice for taking on heavily armored enemies, and their Lion Cloaks are not merely for show, they provide them extra protection against ranged units as well as magical missile fire. And the last place that you want to fight against the White Lions is inside the forest, and that's because their Forest Strider ability gives them a bonus to both attack and defense when competing inside your wooded areas. Next, let's take a look at these gentlemen who seem to be exceptionally happy with wielding two-handed swords. They are the Swordmasters of Hoeth, but unlike the White Lions, they are also anti-infantry, which makes them fantastic at taking on targets smaller than a horse. And finally, the Swordmasters of Hoeth are proficient proficient at deflecting enemy missile fire to avoid damage altogether, which does help them to get into combat considering they're not carrying a big old shield. And finally, let's take a look at the most elite of the High Elven units. You are looking at the Phoenix Guard with their halberds. Unlike their elven brethren, the Phoenix Guard are silent and they have foreseen their own death, which makes them fearless on the battlefield and also inflicts fear on their opponents, which causes leadership penalties. The Phoenix Guard should be your go-to unit for holding the line against monstrosities on the battlefield. They're very proficient against large monsters, and they also have a charge defense against all. And while they're undoubtedly very expensive to purchase and also to maintain, there's nothing quite like the Phoenix Guard for holding back the enemy's wrath. Next up, let's take a look at some of the ranged units of the High Elven army. Now, all of the Elven ranged units are very long range, with the range on their base archers being 180. This can allow High Elven archers to get their shots in way before the enemy can, and so you can force them to attack you or even just soften them up significantly before they can even return fire. Elven archers come in two varieties, your bog standard unit and also ones with light armor. But as we can see here, their armor goes from 15 up to 40 and they also have a little bit better melee defense, but you're going to have to pay to have that privilege. However, the High Elves also have access to the Loathen Sea Guard, which as we can see on the left have significantly better leadership, melee defense, melee attack, weapon strength, but they do have to sacrifice 10% of their ammunition and a little bit of their range to achieve this. And the best thing about them is they also carry spears into battle. And so this just makes them absolutely wonderful because not only can they soften up the enemy at further ranges than their archers are capable of, but if any of their larger units do manage to make it into the combat, then it's not going to be the end of the world. And against these rat ogres, their spears are going to provide them with a key advantage compared to other archers. And you can also equip your Loathen Sea Guard with shields as well, which allows them to take missile fire from the enemy and then just absolutely dominate them. The Loathen Sea Guard are kind of an all-purpose unit, and I'm pretty sure you could probably just fill an entire army with them, and as long as you're not taking out an elite enemy army on side the campaign map, they're pretty much going to be efficient against all comers. Next, let's take a look at the plethora of mounted units available for the High Elves. Firstly, the Illyrian Reavers. Illyrian Reavers get Vanguard deployment, which means they can mount up really close to the enemy lines at the start of the battle and get straight into the combat if that's your kind of thing. And while this can be really good if you know, for example, the enemy is wielding a ranged heavy army and you can use them to immediately get a couple of kills on entire units, they are very lightly armored indeed, and as we can see here, this unit did not fare very well under the enemy missile fire. So unless you can lock down the ranged units, you're going to lose your hit points on them very quickly indeed. And so maybe the Silver Helms will be more your thing. As we can clearly see here, they are just better than the Illyrian Reavers in pretty much every single way. Their armor is double, their leadership is better, their melee attack, their melee strength, their charge bonus is better. They're a little bit slower and their melee defense might be a little bit lower, but if that bothers, you can also equip your Silver Helms with shields, as we can see here, which significantly increases their melee defense but decreases their charge bonus a little bit. However, sometimes also your Silver Helms are not quite going to cut it, especially when there are monstrous rat ogres on the enemy team. And that's where you want to look no further than to call in the elite of the High Elven army, the pinnacle of their cavalry. They are the Dragon Princes. They are armored, shielded. They also have dragon armor, which protects them against fire damage. And they're also martial masters, which means that as long as their unit does not get heavily damaged, they get a huge amount of bonuses to take on their opponents. And so while your Silver Helms may have failed to take on the most monstrous of the enemy army, look no further than your Dragon Princes to win you the day. And after they've dealt with all of the scary units, Dragon Princes are just as proficient at mowing down the enemy's ranged units. Goodbye, rats. The High Elves also combine the best of both worlds in the form of the Illyrian Reaver archers. Not only do these archers get Vanguard deployment, which allow them to deploy very close to the enemy at the beginning of the battle, they're also longer range than, for example, the slingers on the enemy team. And so this means that they can shoot them from safety, and with a good amount of micro, you can keep out of range of the enemy's archers and pummel them freely. And considering your Reaver archers can also fire while moving, this is probably one of the most powerful units for harassing anyone in Total War Warhammer 2. And if you love nothing more than to annoy people inside the Total War Warhammer 2 multiplayer, then think about fielding a bunch of these Reaver archers. The amount of harassment you're going to be able to put out will just surely frustrate everybody you encounter. The High Elves also have 2 chariots at their disposal. Firstly, let's take a look at the Tyrannok Chariots. These are very long-ranged missile chariots. Look at that, 165 range and 124 missile damage. And they're also very, very fast as well. So while these rat ogres are trying to close the distance and get some damage off on us, we're just going to bomb it away from them and continue to soften them up before they even have a hope of damaging us. And just like with the Reaver archers, the Tyrannok chariots can be an absolute pain in the backside to track down in both the campaign and furthermore the multiplayer. However, when you want to close the distance, the High Elves also have the Ithilmar chariots available. These are absolutely fantastic for hit and run engagements, bombing in, doing a lot of damage, and pulling back ludicrously quickly, because they've got a speed of 78 base, as we can see here. That's more than capable of outrunning every single Skaven unit. And with one of the highest charge bonuses in the game of 70, this makes them one of the best anti-infantry shock troops in the whole of the High Elven army. So apart from a semi-artillery chariot, the only piece of artillery inside the High Elven army is the Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower. And the great thing about the Eagle Claw Bolt Thrower is that it has multiple firing modes, unlike the Skaven, for example, whereas you want to take your Warp Lightning Cannons against your large units and your Plague Claw Catapults against the enemy infantry. You can just simply switch your Eagle Claw Bolt Throwers to be efficient against the monstrous units on the enemy team or against the infantry on the enemy team. For example, we can use the armor-piercing standard round here and target the Hell Pit Abomination. And while this is far more artillery than you're ever going to take, look how efficient these armor-piercing missiles are at taking out one of the most dangerous units in the game. Now let's switch it up into the anti-infantry mode and fire at the Skaven Slave Spears here. And yeah, these Skaven Slave Spears, they're not going to be around for very much longer to tell the tale. And so this makes the Eagle Claw infantry just so flexible, and if you micromanage them well, you only need to take one kind of artillery to take out both their monstrous units and also the hordes of infantry. Now let's take a look at the diverse selection of aerial units available to the High Elves. Firstly, the Great Eagles. As the Great Eagles are an aerial unit, this means they can completely bypass melee combat, and as they are ludicrously quick, this allows you to engage quickly with your opponents and also target their artillery. That is the best way to use your Eagles. Swoop in, take out the enemy artillery early on in the game, see them destroying the Warp Lightning Cannons here. That means that once we've taken out all of the enemy artillery, we can then get them out of there, and they won't be giving the rest of our army any trouble later on in the battle. But be warned, these Eagles, while they are very fast, we can see they're not very well armored at all. And so that makes them quite fragile, so don't think you can just field a whole army of Eagles without support of other units to take on the enemy's ranged. Next up, let's take a look at the Majestic Flame Pyre Phoenix. And just like the Great Eagles, they are really, really quick, but one of the best things about them is they can use this ability called Wake of Fire, and so this drops literally a firebomb below them that can incinerate anything down below. This makes the Phoenix great at aerial bombardment to soften up their opponents before they go down and engage them in melee combat. And when they do decide to swoop down on their opponents, they are none the less destructive than the Great Eagles are. One of the best things about the Phoenixes as well is they have an ability called Rebirth, and what this means is, just like with the Hell Pit Abomination, when their hit points goes down to 10%, they have a 50% chance of refusing to die and instead being rebirthed and gaining some hit points. When a Flame's Pyre Phoenix gets old, its burning embers subside and it becomes a Frostheart Phoenix. While significantly slower and with less melee attack and charge bonus than its fiery younger self, the Frostheart Phoenix has significantly more armor, nearly triple. It's got better leadership and its melee defense and its weapon strength is also higher. The Frostheart Phoenix also has an ability called Blizzard Aura, which reduces the melee attack and also the armor-piercing damage of its opponents in an aura around itself. And what this means is it's a really good idea to keep one Frostfire Phoenix in your army to just throw into the melee. It's very resilient, it's going to survive for quite a while, and it's going to debuff all of the enemy that surround it. And the Frostheart Phoenix shows that sometimes things just get a little bit better with age. Now let's take a look at my favorite thing about the High Elves, and that is 3 different kinds of dragons. Firstly, the Sun Dragon. These dragons are the youngest of the 3 inside the High Elven army, and their breath lacks focus, but it hits a large area, which makes them very proficient at dealing with large infantry groups. Next up, the Moon Dragon, and while the Moon Dragon's breath doesn't quite have the area effect of the Sun Dragon, it is more focused, which makes it more suited for dealing with those harder hitting larger units. Now the Moon Dragon has significantly more health than the Sun Dragon. Its leadership is higher, it's a little slower, as I guess you get in old age, but it has greater melee defense, weapon strength, but loses a little bit of that furious charge bonus. But the eldest of all dragons is the Star Dragon. And once again, this is a significant upgrade over both the Sun and the Moon Dragons. Now having 80 armor instead of 50, higher leadership, once again a little bit slower, better melee attack, melee defense, weapon strength, but again losing a little bit of that charge bonus. And the Star Dragon's breath can melt through even the toughest of units in Total War Warhammer 2. And there's really nothing quite as satisfying in the game as having a whole flight of dragons to tear into the enemy army. And while this isn't probably the most efficient use of dragons inside Total War Warhammer 2, just having 1 or 2 of them can completely change the direction of the battle. And also, as we can see here, the dragons have unique fighting animations when they take on some of the larger units of their armies. Whoa, look at it taking on that Hell Pit abomination. Oh, I could just sit here and watch. I keep on mentioning this in all of the videos, but it never ceases to amaze me just how awesome Total War Warhammer 2 looks like when you go all up in its face, so to say, and not just zooming out on the macro level and looking at the engagement between thousands and thousands of units. And so there you go, that was my army roster guide on the High Elves, one of the most diverse factions that I have ever played in a Total War game. They've got defense, they've got offense, they've got range, they've got dragons. What more do you need in an army? Hopefully I was able to demystify it a little bit for you, and this video was either enjoyable or maybe just useful. If it was, please give it a thumbs up, I'd really appreciate it. But if you hated the video, give it a thumbs down and let me know in the comments why. And stay tuned to the channel, as I've still got Lizardmen and Dark Elves to cover. And let me know in the comments what you think about the High Elf army roster. Are there any units that are specifically missing from it? And how do you think it stacks up compared to the Skaven which you saw last time? And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.